We finds it. We has the pressures.
Hey, weirdo, give me the microphone, come here. And this just in, it's now our turn. Stop it, give me the microphone, now.
The voices have all converged on the microphone for this 1,000 subscriber special.
You know what else was special? Games like BioShock, Assassin's Creed.
Looks like things just got out of hand.
Hey, look, it's that wizard guy from the comic books, Dr. Hey, whoa, copyright much? Oh my god, you have got to be kidding me. When I said this was our 1,000 subscriber special, I didn't mean you all were invited.
For a writer, his communication is quite poor.
Stinky little hobbitses, they lied to us.
Alright, that's it. You know what? I'm stopping the recording. I'm stopping it right now. Give me that. Come on. Hey everyone. Sorry for all that chaos. Welcome to the Saved His Draft podcast. The only show where I, Bradley Ramsey, talk to you about the craft of writing, what I'm working on, and why you should care. And here we are, episode 7 of the show, where we celebrate not 1, not 2, but 3 milestones. Not only has my Substack publication crossed 1,000 subscribers, but I've also crossed 20,000 views on the publication, and there have been over 1,000 downloads of this little podcast here. I don't even know where to begin to thank you for all the support. As many of you know, I've been publishing my work elsewhere on the internet for about 4 years now, and I've never managed even a fraction of these results. It's really humbling, above all else. And as you know, I'm determined to pay it forward. Which brings me to some of our announcements here, and then we'll get into the week's shoutouts. First off, the poetry collective that I started with fellow Substack author Mary Ellen Brady has officially wrapped up its first monthly poetry contest. The prompt was a photo of candy hearts, and we had nearly 10 people submit all kinds of awesome poems. Mary Ellen and I spoke yesterday, and we came to a unanimous decision on the winner. Didn't even have to argue about it. And so, the winner of the first ever Soulful Poetry Collective monthly poetry contest is V. Walker, with her entry, Sweet Then Sour. Congratulations to V, and if you haven't subscribed yet to the Soulful Poetry Collective, I'll go ahead and wait so you can go do that. You all set? Okay, awesome. Let's move on. Next, I wanted to share some information on a giveaway that I sponsored from a different writer and poet here on Substack named Hazel Allen. Hazel has a poetry collection called Inside the Sun and Moon with a second collection on the way as well. You can enter a giveaway for a chance to win a grand prize, which includes a copy of the book, a custom-themed journal, and a $25 bookstore gift card. Even if you don't win the grand prize, 3 other folks will win a copy of the book as well, and 2 further runner-ups will get a digital copy of the collection that they can read on their phone or Kindle or any other e-reader. Find a link to enter the giveaway in the show notes if you're interested, and be sure to subscribe to Hazel Allen Writes if you're a fan of great poetry. You won't be disappointed. Next up is our weekly shout-out segment, and this week I did something special for our 1,000 subscriber celebration. Basically what I did was I created a thread in my subscriber chat on Substack, and I asked people to submit a link to the work that they're most proud of. It didn't have to be from this year, it could be from whenever they started Substack. But I had a bunch of people enter. Over 20 people actually dropped links in there. So what I did was, because you know me, I wanted to just go through all 20 and talk about all of them, but that would be, I don't know, probably like a 3-hour podcast. So what I did instead is I decided to use a random number generator, and I picked 5 links at random, and I read the stories earlier so that I could write up my thoughts here in the podcast episode. So without further delay, here are the 5 who were selected and my thoughts on each. Number 1 is Unforgivable by C.J. Yardley. This is the first piece I've read from them, and I gotta be honest with you, it's one of the best stories I've read on Substack, hands down. When I wrote this, I was holding back tears because I just finished reading it. But let me tell you, the ending is incredibly effective, but only because everything leading up to it was so perfectly crafted. The dialogue and the relationship between the 2 main characters is stunningly realistic and full of personality. The story follows 2 people who keep meeting at holiday parties and different local events. And over the story, their banter kind of develops, and it's very fun and their personalities are super interesting and unique, and the writing itself is just insanely sharp. The imagery, especially, that accompanies each of these scenes is exquisite. You get really nice descriptions. For example, they're at a costume party a few times, so you get really great descriptions of their costumes, and it really sets the atmosphere. Like I said, all this builds to an ending that was, it was an emotional gut punch. Yeah, it got me good. I laughed, I cried, and then I subsequently subscribed. And honestly, you should too. This writer is extremely good. Number 2 is Claws by L.G. Wells. This story has a content warning for domestic violence, so a heads up there, but it's a tale that expertly puts power into the hands of the victim. I don't want to spoil anything, but let's just say karma's a bitch. And this story does a phenomenal job of developing rich characters on both sides of the equation. It also has a deeply satisfying ending. I think what impressed me most about this one was the character development. It's not a very long story, it'll only take a few minutes to read, but that time that it does an incredible job of illustrating complex and believable characters, and has some really wonderful writing to bring it all together. Number 3 is Mirror, Mirror at My Table by Anigile Bentalon, and I hope I pronounced that right. I actually read this story when it was first posted for one of my Flash Fiction February prompts, but I had to reread it for this occasion. I had not read any horror from this author prior to this story, so I wasn't really sure what to expect, but what I got was delightfully horrific. The prompt for the story involved you coming home to find a doppelganger at your family's dinner table. In this case, the copy in the story was in fact the main character's twin, and she's having dinner with the protagonist's husband. And let me tell you, in this story, revenge is best served well done. You'll know what I mean when you read it. It's shocking. It's not for the faint of heart, and it goes some places. But man, is it sublime as a horror experience. If you love horror, I cannot recommend it enough. Number 4 is Fabulous 50 by Devo Carpenter. Devo is one of the first friends I made here on Substack, and I still recall a short story of theirs that I read, and after reading it, it's one of those stories that just stayed in my mind in a good way. So I was excited to sit down and check out this piece that they submitted for the podcast. Having just finished it, I wrote down my thoughts in my script here, and I gotta say, Devo's done it again. The style that they use is authentic and honest. It kind of feels like you're having coffee or tea or a drink with an old friend. The story just flows very effortlessly, and the details are straight to the point. It doesn't waste any time or words on anything else beyond what you need to know. There's also a sense of nostalgia to it all, and a warmness to the writing that creates this really welcoming atmosphere. That's not to say that it's all sunshine and rainbows, though. This piece explores the relationships we have with our family, and the pain that comes with losing them as we get older. Number 5 is The Last Look by Victoria Hildebrand. I went into this story completely blind. But within the first few paragraphs, I felt like I was deep into some sort of Pulp Fiction or Quentin Tarantino marathon. And I mean that in the best way possible. I honestly at one point had to double check and make sure I didn't accidentally click on, Quentin Tarantino's Substack account. And that's absolutely a compliment, by the way. I love his style of movies, dialogue, characters, just everything about what he does as a director is phenomenal. And that same tone comes through in this story. Victoria's writing voice is incredibly sharp. The characters' dialogue and banter is not only believable, but extremely based on their personality, and it brings that personality to the forefront with every single line they speak. The pacing is also perfect as well. The story takes us through a business deal that goes bad, and there's a rich tapestry of imagery throughout the story, especially in the action-packed second half. This is one of the most fun stories I've read on Substack. I just had a really good time. And I'll tell you, next time I see Victoria publish something, you can bet I'll be the first in line to check it out. So that's our 5 for this week, and another huge thank you to all the featured authors for sharing their work and participating in my random selection little mini contest here. If you liked this whole format, if you enjoyed the opportunity to share your stuff for the chance to be featured in the podcast, let me know in the show's comments. I would love to do more of this. Normally when I do these weekly shout-outs, I just kind of pick whatever stuck in my mind that week from going around Substack and reading different writers. But I think this could be a cool way to, add a little bit of chance to it. And the random element ensures that I can check out some writers that maybe I haven't read before, which clearly is a good thing because several of today's writers were new to me. And I have some new favorites. All right, next up is our section that's tentatively titled Last Week in Writing. And usually what I do here with the podcast is I give you kind of a behind-the-scenes look at every single story that I published in the last week. And I'm starting to think that maybe that it's running a little long because I publish a lot of stuff, at least once a day. So we're going to work it up. We're going to change it up. And so moving forward, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be mentioning every single story that I published in the last week, and instead, I'm going to focus on the top 3 best performing stories based on views, and I'll share a little bit of behind-the-scenes details still about what went into writing them and what inspired them, if it's relevant. So, technically last week, I know I just said we're going to keep this short, but technically last week, my content directory had the most views at 549, which is awesome because it was the first time that anything I published had crossed over 500 views on its own. So that's really cool. That being said, if you haven't seen that pinned post that I did, it's a table of contents that organizes my stories, articles, and poems into sections based on a few different factors. You'll be able to find handy links to all my connected fantasy and horror stories as well, in case you want to dive into the respective universes that I've started building. So check it out. It's pinned at the top of my publication and will be. I constantly update it with links to all the new stuff. At 465 views, the top performing story, actual story, this past week was my flash fiction piece entitled A Cure for Burnout. I'm happy that this one did so well because it was a prequel to the very first short story that I published on Substack. And this story is set in a world where a mental illness called burnout kind of spreads rapidly. And once it gets into your brain, it will, at random, flip a switch that'll turn you into like a rage-fueled monster that just starts killing everybody around them. It's pretty scary stuff. And what's even worse is that when it eventually wears off or it goes dormant again, you remember everything you did. So that's where it becomes a much scarier horror story. Below that one, coming in at number 2, was 463 views, and that was my flash fiction piece called Another Life. This story was for one of the flash fiction prompts as well. And this is the one that I had mentioned earlier during one of the featured stories in the shout-out section regarding a doppelganger or copy of yourself at your dinner table. So the way that I approached this prompt myself is I had these 2 characters who are park rangers, and they kind of get lost on a hike and end up stepping into a parallel universe on accident. And the main character realizes that in this parallel universe, his wife never died in a car crash. So not only does he run into her, but he runs into a copy of himself in this parallel universe. And so you're probably thinking, wow, what does he do? Well, that's the fun part. I made this a choose your own adventure. So when it comes time to decide whether or not you're going to stay or go back to your universe, that's up to you. There's 2 different endings. Check it out and let me know what you think. Next up, number 3 for this week was at 460 views. That was my flash fiction piece entitled Abomination. This piece is for the prompt that involved some characters running across a rope bridge. There's arrows like whizzing past them. I took this prompt and set it in my horror mythos, or universe, if you will, called the Synaptic Sprawl, which is sort of a horror multiverse type setup. And in this particular story, we encounter a horrific creature being held captive beneath a remote island in the Pacific. I'm going to leave that in the Pacific Ocean. For this story, I also created some typewritten. Wow, we got multiple mess ups here. I created some typewritten letters in Canva to kind of give it that meta narrative touch. There's one at the beginning and one at the end, and so it just kind of adds another layer to the reading experience. And so those were my top 3 stories from last week based on views, including obviously the content directory, which was, I know, a 4th one. But going forward, 3. We'll do the top 3. So let me know what you think about this new format in the comments of the episode page. I'd love to know what you think. Moving right along. Next up is our weekly writing tips segment. And this week I want to talk about narration and voiceovers, specifically how not to mess up like I did a second ago. As many of you know, I've been recording narration for my short stories, specifically the ones that are set in my fantasy realm of Devine, my other universe. There's a character in those stories named Finton Marybrook who narrates them, so I wanted to have the option for people to listen to his voice because I have a way that he talks with a certain accent when they're checking out those stories. I've been recording my poems as well in the past week, and I wasn't sure if this would work quite as well, but it actually does. Anyone who writes poetry knows that rhythm and flow are incredibly important, so reading it out loud allows the listener to experience the exact cadence that you had heard in your head when you wrote it. So I guess at this point you're probably asking yourself, how do I get started if I want to post audio versions of my Substack stories? Well, it's super easy to do in the actual Substack editor, there's a little button up top next to the add image button where you can add a voiceover, and all you have to do is upload a file. But let's talk about how you create that file, right? Because that's the hardest part. So all you need is a microphone and a recording program, and of course a computer. I use a free software myself called Audacity, and while it's not perfect, it works really well, and I'm actually using it to record this podcast right now. So I would highly recommend that. Like I said, it's totally free. It's called Audacity. As far as microphones go, I have a Yeti Blue microphone, and I think it's fantastic. I had a prior Yeti Blue microphone that lasted over 10 years before I had to replace it. And let me tell you, it had been through a lot. We're talking multiple moves across states. It was dropped a few times, and it recorded hours upon hours and hours of voice acting when I was working on animated projects with my best friend James Nethery. And speaking of animated projects, he and I are currently working on a series called The Chronicles of Clenchport, which will have its own companion podcast entitled The Many Worlds of Clenchport. We've already recorded the first 4 episodes, so stay tuned for that, but I digress. Let me get back to my tips here. Once you have your microphone, your software, and your story, or a poem, or even an article, you can get started recording your stuff and doing some narration. So let's go through a few tips then, once you have your setup ready. Number 1 is that you're probably going to talk too fast. Even someone like myself who's been recording for years, I still have to stop and remind myself constantly to slow down. Timing is very important, even if you're just doing a podcast like right now when I'm talking. But stories and poetry, it's even more important. So remember to read at a nice and steady pace, and leave a little bit of space between big moments in dialogue or paragraphs. And don't be afraid to take a breath between story beats. You can always edit that part out later. And here's the thing, even if you try to read all the way through without stopping, you're going to find these little micro breaths in your audio, and you'll want to take those out because they're kind of distracting when you're listening to it. So that's my first tip, is to keep your pace steady, try not to rush things, and pause and take a breath when you feel yourself kind of getting too wrapped up in the moment, if that makes sense. All right, and tip number 2 is to find the voice you want to use before you start recording. You can absolutely read in your regular voice, but take a minute to think about the tone of the story. Is it happy, suspenseful, full of horror? You want to read with an energy that matches the tone of the tale. And bonus points if you want to use an accent or a special voice for a certain character dialogue. You got to get these details right, though, before you start recording. Otherwise, it's going to trip you up. Tip number 3 is to rehearse beforehand. If you're just starting out, you're going to have nerves. Stage fright may refer to being in front of a crowd typically, but trust me, the second that microphone starts recording, it's going to put pressure on you. You need to shake off those nerves before you do the recording for real. So make some time to read at least the beginning of it so that you can kind of shake off the cobwebs before you actually start recording. Trust me, it'll go a lot better as a result. And feel free to record the rehearsal too. The goal here is to just, kind of loosen up the vocal cords, as it were. So the more you practice, the more you'll build confidence for the actual recording, and it'll go better as a result. Tip number 4 is to find a good place to record that doesn't have background noise. And you also want to record in a physical position where you're comfortable. So for example, I have a home office, and I usually set up my microphone at my desk, and I put the story on one of my monitors. Sometimes I'll record standing up so that you have more kind of breath control, especially with intense stories where you need to do lines where characters are yelling or screaming. But overall, I actually prefer to record sitting down. It helps me relax my shoulders, I get to stay a consistent distance from the microphone, and I can also achieve the tone I'm going for pretty easily without causing too many issues. So feel free to try different setups and see what works for you. Tip number 5 is to use the correct tools for recording and editing. You may not know this, but microphones can sometimes pick up pops in the audio when you say certain words with various syllables, especially the letter P. These pops can be really distracting, and they can ruin the immersion for your listeners. So I recommend using some sort of pop filter on your microphone to eliminate this issue. And another common issue that you'll run into is called clipping. This is when audio comes through that's beyond the standard range of the microphone, usually if you're yelling or screaming, for example, and you'll see it in the audio levels on your software, like Audacity, for example. You'll see the kind of blue graphic that represents the audio. It will move past the top and or bottom of the horizontal space there, and that causes the sound to become distorted and messy. And there's a few ways to fix this. You can adjust the input levels, including something called gain if you have a knob that's labeled that on your microphone. And this will allow you to kind of adjust the recording so that it's sensitive enough where you're not too loud or too quiet. For situations where the audio does clip, Audacity also has a really handy tool in the software to reduce the levels. And it works if you're doing minor adjustments, but if you try to drastically shift the audio, it'll sound really weird when you're listening back to it. It'll kind of go from the standard volume to real quiet and then back up again. So in that situation, if it's still clipping, then I would just re-record it. But if you do need to fix some minor clipping, you go to the effect section of the menu, then look for noise removal and repair, and then select the clip fix. This default reduction here is too much, so definitely adjust it. I usually do about 2.5 decibels of reduction. And if you highlight the audio portion before you select the clip fix, it'll automatically adjust just that one spot. And what's cool is that for the rest of your session while the program is open, you can hit Control R or Command R on Mac after highlighting audio to automatically apply that same fix in other places. And that's it for now. These are just 5 quick tips from someone who is by no means an audio professional, but I have been recording long enough that I've figured out a few things like these that are helpful. So stay tuned for an in-depth article on this at some point in the near future. One of my fellow Substack writers, Wajiha, I don't know her last name off the top of my head, but she's a wonderful person. I would definitely check out her work on Substack. She actually made a comment a little while back about doing a article on narration and voiceover, which I thought was really nice. So I still want to do it. It's just one of those things where, I mean, everybody knows how busy I am. Or at least the people who subscribe to me know. All right. Next up, we have the weekly Substack Soapbox Rant. And if you're not familiar with this is the segment of the podcast where I go on a comedic rant about something related to writing, or in this case, something else entirely. We kind of mix it up. So I call this rant, "What does that have to do with the price of eggs?" Let's get into it. So have you ever noticed how things are getting more expensive lately? I'm not talking about eggs either, although let's be honest, those prices aren't going down anytime soon. Despite what certain orange-hued wastes of oxygen with delusions of monarchy will tell you. No, I'm talking about everything in general. Groceries, snacks, hell, my video games and movies are starting to get more expensive. I went to buy peanut butter the other day, and it was $8 for Jif. How could I possibly be a choosy mom in this economy? The answer is that I can't. I can't even be a discerning daddy, and it's ridiculous. And like I said, it doesn't stop at groceries. I'll tell you though, the one thing that made it a little better up until now were the reward programs you saw at different businesses. You know, the ones where you can earn points from purchases, and then eventually you get enough to cash in, you get a discount, you get something for free. You know, it's like an incentive to kind of do business with them. Sometimes it was a free coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, other times it's a discount at Best Buy, and even Nintendo had gold coins that you could get, from the questionable Switch purchases you make on the eShop. Yes, I know it's shovelware, but the art looks cool and it's only $2. But now, they're coming for the reward programs. PlayStation shut off their Stars program that I used to use to get PSN gift cards after spending way too much money on every single new release that looked even mildly interesting. But then there's the aforementioned Nintendo Gold Coins. They're also gone as of this week. My old Best Buy membership, too, had this crazy rewards program where you could pay monthly, but you got discounts on everything, including new releases. That one went the way of the dodo bird a long time ago. And, you still got Dunkin' doing theirs, and, Starbucks, I think, has a rewards program, but how long before those are gone? The only thing that made paying $8 for my venti iced caramel macchiato with 2 shots of espresso was the knowledge that one day, far into the future, I'd have enough reward points to make it free. But they can't even let us have that glimmer of hope, huh? All we do is shovel our hard-earned money into an economy that's literally on fire. They can't even bear to have us let a little bit back. Who are they, the IRS? Ugh. Don't even get me started on tax returns. If you ask me, it's been way too long since we threw a good old-fashioned tea party. That's all I'm saying. All right, and that concludes our rant for this week. For the final section of our podcast, we have Next Week on Substack. And in this section, we'll talk about what's coming up. And in this case, it's the last week of Flash Fiction February. And I'm really excited because I've never actually finished an entire month of this challenge. I tried a few years ago, and I only made it about halfway through the month. So this month, we are making it work. Of course, I got thrown off by the snowstorms and power outages last week. Check out the last episode of the podcast if you want to learn more about that. The last week of Flash Fiction February, I'm also planning on something, as I said last week. I successfully managed to reverse psychology myself into coming up with something. If you listen to the last episode, you'll understand that joke. But for the last week of Flash Fiction February, we're going to do a full week of wildcard prompts. I'm talking stuff I made up, stuff my subscribers thought up, and of course, more prompts from my girlfriend Sarah, who has already inspired more than a few amazing stories with her prompts. So look forward to that the whole last week of February. This week, I'm going to publish my final side story set in Devine as well. It's called The Sunken Citadel, and it takes place before the events of the very first Devine story I published called The Tomb Where Marigolds Grow. So if you enjoyed that first one, you definitely want to check this one out, because it's going to bring some more lore. And again, we're doing this all to build towards the upcoming series that I'm going to write set in Devine, which is called The Order of the Pawn. And what we're going to do to prepare for that series too in the coming week, and probably past that, is I'm going to write and publish some character-specific stories where we get an introduction to each of the members of the Order, and at the end of each one, they're going to be approached by the iconic Finton Marybrook with an offer to join the Order, and it's going to feel a whole lot like the Avengers. I'm even going to put a little thing at the end where it's like, so-and-so will return in the Order of the Pawn, like that whole thing. So keep an eye out for that. Those will be coming soon. And I know what you're thinking as we reach the end of February. You're probably saying, hey, Bradley, well, if one challenge is running out, are there going to be any more? Of course. You think I just do one challenge? Get out of here. No, the answer is yes. And I'm cooking up something special with another Substack author that you may have heard of earlier in the episode by the name of Hazel. But it's a secret, okay? We're not ready to reveal it yet, but stay tuned. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to both of us just to make sure you don't miss it? I'm just saying. And specifically, keep an eye out on our Substacks around March 1st. And that's the last detail I'll drop. Maybe. We'll wait till next week's episode. That's my final decision. Okay. And don't forget to enter the giveaway, too, for Hazel's poetry collection, by the way. Okay, folks, that brings us to the end of another week's episode. And do me a favor, if you enjoyed this, if you made it this far, give it a like, share it on your Substack, restack it for me, and, more than anything, do me a favor and drop a comment in the section below the episode's page on Substack. I want to know what you think. Let me know what you like about the podcast. Let me know what you don't like. Tell me to stop talking so damn much. Whatever you want. I don't care. Just throw it in the comments and I want to know what's on your mind. Okay? Because I want this show to continue to evolve and I want it to be really useful to my fellow writers. So hit me with what you got. Okay? And hey, thank you as always for listening. I hope you have a safe and productive week. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off.